When you think of bullfighting, you probably think of Spain. That brutal exhibition is intrinsically entwined with Spanish culture, despite the controversy. And while it has expanded to other parts of the world, one of the places you probably don't associate with bullfighting is St. Louis, Missouri. The St. Louis World's Fair, officially the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, was a massive event. More than 60 countries and 43 states maintained exhibit space for what would eventually be more than 20 million visitors. But in addition to those exhibitions, several private enterprises set up near the fair in hopes of making money from the crowds. Some of those were more successful than others, but few were as ridiculously unsuccessful as the attempt to stage a Spanish-style bullfight in Missouri. It's history that deserves to be remembered.
Bullfighting has been practiced for thousands of years in human societies. Its exact origins are somewhat unclear. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes Gilgamesh fighting the bull of heaven in a manner not unlike modern Spanish bullfighting. Gilgamesh dancing in front of the bull, lured it with his tunic and bright weapons, and Enkidu thrust his sword deep into the bull's neck. Highly ritualized, it may have roots in bull worship and sacrifice. How exactly it entered Spanish culture is unclear. The Romans had a variety of human versus animal events, including fighting bulls, and other theories have been proposed as well. Whatever the method, by the Middle Ages bullfighting was well established, especially in what is now Spain. Charlemagne, Alfonso X of Castile, and Iberian Muslim caliphs were said to enjoy the event. The exact rules and systems for fighting the bull evolved over time, with fighters generally fighting only from horseback until the 1700s. The Spanish and Portuguese brought the tradition with them when they built their empires, leading to its establishment throughout the world. While bullfighting did find traction in former Spanish colonies like the Philippines, Mexico, and Peru, it was never established in British and French colonies further north. While some areas of southern France have long traditions of bullfighting, it never caught on elsewhere in Europe either. Even fairly early in history, there was resistance to bullfighting. The Catholic Church never liked bullfighting, and in 1567 Pope Pius V actually issued a bull banning the practice on pain of excommunication, calling it cruel and base spectacles of the devil. Later popes blunted the rule, however, and it never really stuck. There was resistance even in Spain, especially during the Enlightenment. José de Vargas Ponce once established a scathing critique of the practice in 1807, though he and other opponents were less concerned about animal rights than they were the harm that they felt it did to agriculture and its alleged negative effects on the Spanish national character, as summarized by Andrew Schultz in a 2008 article in the Art Bulletin. Several Spanish kings even tried to ban the practice in the late 18th century, but to little practical effect. In the United States, bullfighting was generally considered uncivilized. In 1855, Ballot's Dollar Monthly magazine described it as a barbarous, terrible, and sanguinary spectacle. Thomas Ewing Moore, a secretary in the American Diplomatic Service in Lisbon, called it a grim exhibition of how far the avoidance of fair play can be carried. Hemingway called it a tragedy, not a sport. Many Americans also decried the frequent and often horrible death of horses, gored by bulls during the fight. Some early American laws approached the concept of banning animal cruelty in the 1800s. In Vermont, by 1846, a statute penalized willfully killing or wounding any horse or horses or horse kind, cattle, sheep, or swine of another person, with a 5-year sentence in prison, although it didn't criminalize doing it to your own animals. An 1821 law in Maine criminalized cruelly beating horse or cattle, and an 1828 law in New York made it a misdemeanor to maliciously or cruelly beat or torture horses, cattle, oxen, or sheep. In 1866, New York revised the animal cruelty law, largely at the behest of Henry Bergh, who was inspired by the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in England. Bergh founded the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals on April 10, 1866, and would be instrumental in the drafting of a revised statute in 1867, which criminalized a large number of abuses to any living creature and empowered the ASPCA to enforce the law. The 1867 law was pivotal, as numerous states adopted similar laws and created similar societies in the years that followed. Bullfighting was also targeted on the state level. Missouri and other states specifically criminalized bullfighting. The revised statutes of 1899 of the state of Missouri included a section on bullfighting, making it a misdemeanor to be involved in any way with fighting or baiting any bull. There was some bullfighting in the U.S., especially in areas originally colonized by Spain. San Francisco had 2 bull rings in the 1850s, and bullfights continued in California at least until 1891, when A.H. Beale, president of the Minneapolis Humane Society, vociferously protested in the L.A. Times a bullfight scheduled for Christmas Day. Another was held at Dodge City, Kansas, for the 4th of July in 1884. People were arrested in Colorado in 1895 after a bullfight was held in Gillette, and the governor even called for the local Humane Society agent to be fired on the grounds of incompetency. The American Humane Association censored the secretary of the Colorado Humane Society for failing to prevent the fight. Americans continued to see bullfighting and other blood sports in the Mexican border towns and criticized it harshly. According to the book Death and Money in the Afternoon, A History of the Spanish Bullfight, before and beyond all else, the bullfight was a business. Its purpose from its inception was to make money. That's part of why it flourished in Mexico under Pancho Villa, who used its proceeds to fund his army.
It was also the inspiration for promoter Richard Norris' plan to stage bullfights at the 1904 World's Fair.
The concept certainly fit with many other exhibitions, which included anthropological displays of natives from around the world, as well as cultural displays from a variety of foreign countries. Bullfighting was a well-known, if barbarous, amusement from another culture. Little is known of Norris outside of his promotion of this event, although the St. Louis Republic called him a well-known amusement promoter in 1904. If Norris ever planned on showing an authentic bullfight, he quickly acquiesced to local outcry and law by altering the spectacle to fit within American sensibility. Most importantly, that involved not killing the bull. In February of 1904, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram reported that an imitation bullfight may be given for the Cattle Raisers Convention in Fort Worth in March. That fight had to contend with the laws of the state prohibiting bullfights and was to be clean and chaste and would be merely imitative of the Mexican bullfight. Slated for that night were 2 men, E. Carlton Bass and Manuel Cervera Prieto. The two had performed together for several years before they were enlisted by Norris for the World's Fair bullfight. The histories of both are muddled by claims that they made for promotional purposes. Bass was an Irishman. He claimed to be related to famed Irish writer William Carleton, but he also billed himself as the American Matador and the Anglo-Saxon bullfighter. The New York Times published an article quoting Bass, who refused to deny rumors that he was the son of a noted English family and heir to a title and estates. He claimed to have been involved in the failed Jameson raid, which attempted to incite a rebellion in the South African Republic. He claimed to have been sentenced to death and escaped despite a wall of gunfire, even showing a white scar where a ball supposedly still resided. He claimed to have learned bullfighting in Spain before going to the New World. He said he learned bullfighting in Spain, then Mexico, and then to San Antonio. Cervera, too, made claims. He was a Spaniard who at some point crossed to Mexico. He claimed to be Spain's most famous bullfighter and even claimed to be the favorite matador of King Alfonso XIII. He said he was the nephew of Pascal Cervera y Tepete, the famous Spanish admiral who had fought bravely but lost to the Americans at the Battle of Santiago de Cuba in the Spanish-American War. ElMuletazo.com, a Spanish website that bills itself as the Diary of Bullfighting in the Murcia region, has a different origin for Cervera, claiming that he was the nephew of Spanish bullfighter Diego Four Fingers Prieto, who brought Cervera with him to Mexico as a boy. He does seem to have been bullfighting in Spain when he met his wife. Whatever the origin, and despite their grandiose billing, neither one may have been much good at bullfighting. The San Antonio Daily Express wrote that neither could be rated as matadors in the bullfighting arena. Cervera tried to master the sport as some Spaniards have. He apparently was an utter failure at times, and there were days in Mexico where he was unable to kill the bull. In Night in the Sun by Marshall Hale, he says that Bass lost his nerve and could not face his bulls, and even had to be saved from wrathful spectators by the soldiery in shows in Mexico. Their performances in San Antonio were judged tame. However, El Regidor, a Spanish newspaper published in San Antonio, reported favorably on an imitation bullfight staged by the pair in October 1903, calling it a well-executed performance that earned ovations. They certainly looked the part, and with 5 others, accepted the invitation from Norris to appear in 5 months' worth of bullfights at the World's Fair. The Daily Express reported that they would be paid $5,000 for the season, roughly $182,000 today, adjusted for inflation. The Daily Express also reported that the pair were almost inseparable while they were in San Antonio, and that they had first met in Barcelona, where they both became matadors. There was also another important wrinkle. Marion Abel. Abel was born in Baltimore, proved to be an excellent opera singer. She sailed for Europe when she was 20 years old with an opera company and, according to the New York Times, attended a bullfight in southern Spain, where she first saw the famous matador, Manuel Cervera. When she returned to the U.S., she remained in contact with him, and they seem to have been married in Texas around 1899. From that point, she acted as something of a manager for Cervera. Cervera seems to have played a large role in the scheme. His wife's parents claimed he had personally found the bullfighters, while the St. Louis Republic called him the fighters' captain. As the bullfighters arrived in St. Louis, debate raged about the exhibition. Missouri law explicitly forbade bullfighting, but Norris promised that there would be no cruelty or brutality incident to the fight. He declared that the law would be followed in every particular. The St. Louis Republic reported that Norris had gotten a showman's license for the display by presenting his case before a 3-judge tribunal. When the judges suggested safeguards, he not only accepted the suggestions, but tacked on an amendment to the grant to the effect that the first showing of any cruelty to animals used in the fight should forfeit his privilege. Norris began advertising only after receiving permission and spent thousands. He claimed $60,000 in preparation, constructing a large stadium that could sit between 12 and 18,000 people just outside the fair. The bull was to be dressed in cork, and no blade would actually puncture his hide. Even the day before the fight, the Republic seemed to have its doubts that the event would actually take place, writing that if the bullfight was to take place, it must be humane, and that Sheriff Henkin of St. Louis County will be on hand with shotguns, if necessary, to see that there was no violation of the law. He planned on doing 2 shows a day. That wasn't enough to satisfy the Humane Society, however. The American Humane Society president, James M. Brown, protested directly to Missouri Governor Alexander Dockery, calling the practice barbarous, cruel, bloodthirsty, degrading, and demoralizing, calling it the flagrant outrage upon the civilization of the state of Missouri, and asked Dockery to use the full power of your state to halt the event. The event was heavily advertised and scheduled for Sunday, June 5th. According to the St. Louis Republic, Sheriff Henkin received a telegram from the governor on the afternoon of June 4th. Bullfight must be prevented at all hazards. Wire me tonight at Jefferson City what you will do in the matter. Sheriff Henkin then confronted Norris with the telegram and warned him of any attempt to give the fight. Despite the ultimatum, Paymaster Perry, who represented Norris, told the paper the next morning that positively the proposed exhibition would be pulled off that afternoon at 2:30. By 3 p.m., between 6,000 and 8,000 people were in the arena. Reports differ slightly on the number, and many pushed their way in rather than pay. Perhaps Norris and the rest of the management was less confident than they had claimed, because a preliminary show by the Cummins Wild West show was put on first. The crowd grew restless. "Where's the bull? We want to see the bull," the crowd shouted. At one point, the announcer shouted back at the crowd, "You mustn't think just because you're wearing men's clothes that you're gentlemen." A lacrosse show was then put on. At 4:30, the bullfight was announced, and as the bullfighters were being introduced, the sheriff and several deputies interrupted, reading the telegram from the governor. Norris then came forward and demanded that the officers leave, and the fighters, Norris, other managers of the show, and the officers all left. While the crowd shouted, "Mob the sheriff," deputies held them off at gunpoint and took several men off to the county jail. Realizing that the show wasn't going to happen, the crowd demanded refunds, but the money had simply disappeared. Some poor employee explained that there would be no refunds as too many people had sneaked in through the openings between the seats. The mob rioted. They began smashing things, wrecking the amusement office where the management and police were negotiating. According to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the crowd had gathered outside the office, and a boy threw a cinder through the glass. Instantly, there was a cry of, "Wreck the place!" Deputies tried to calm the crowd, then of several thousand people. One man was reported seriously injured by a rock thrown at Norris. Norris and the rest of management quietly disappeared while the crowd went back to the arena and freed the bulls with the intention of fighting the things themselves. The bulls, however, proved mild. Men and boys rushed the poor creatures, panicking them and causing the crowd to roll on their seats with laughter. The crowd began throwing trash, chairs, and more at the bulls, while a member of the Humane Society tried to open the gate and free the bulls from the tournament. Once the bulls were free, the horses came next, and the crowd turned to different amusement. "We'll have our dollar's worth," one in the crowd shouted, and the amphitheater was torn apart. The county deputies merely watched, even as the crowd tried to set the structure on fire, helpless to stop the riot. It finally went up, and bullfighters fled from the small rooms that they had adjacent to the arena. Marion Cervera later reported that she cowed the crowd for a moment before freeing the animals from the fire. And as the fire burned, no firemen arrived. The fair's firemen only intervened to keep the flames from spreading to the fair itself. The arena burned to ashes. Reports claim that several dozen people were arrested, but most of them were freed by the crowd. Members of the amusement company's management would end up in court over the fiasco. The plight, however, was possibly worse for the bullfighters, who were stranded in St. Louis without pay. Bass and some of the other fighters accused Cervera and his wife of having received a check for $250 but not distributing it to the others. Cervera claimed the check had not been paid at the bank. A gathering of the angered fighters and Bass took place at the Mozart Hotel on June 8th. Cervera and several others appeared unexpectedly, and Cervera gave an angry speech. A different report claims Cervera had secured passage back to Texas and spoke with great politeness. Bass reiterated their demands, and according to Bass, pulled a knife, saying, "I will stick you like I would a bull, you pig." The two men fought over the weapon for a moment before Cervera got the best of the fight. Bass claimed he missed stabbing only by jumping on his bed, and then he drew his revolver and shot Cervera in the chest, killing him instantly. In the aftermath, Bass and the other fighters were arrested. Marion Cervera said she was waiting at a restaurant for her husband when she heard the news. Bass claimed self-defense, and the coroner's jury returned an open verdict of homicide. According to the Marys County Gazette, Marion testified that Cervera had brought the knife, although she later told a Baltimore paper that she had testified that he never carried a knife. She also claimed that she had seen Bass practicing shooting a few days earlier, and she questioned him as to why. "You'll see," she says he answered ominously. Bass was released, and the killing was determined to be in self-defense. As a coda to the disaster, Bass and the other fighters alleged that Norris had been unable to find good bulls and had simply picked some up in East St. Louis. When Bass complained, Norris assured him that the authorities were going to stop the fight and that it had never been intended that a real bullfight should be given at all.
Cervera was buried in Baltimore, shares a headstone with his parents-in-law, whom he said had shown him great affection. After the funeral, Marion returned to St. Louis, where she worked to frustrate Bass's continued efforts to stage more bullfights. A handful of bloodless bullfights were actually staged the following September with different promoters, but only a handful before they were also arrested by authorities, although they were eventually acquitted of any crimes. Marion was clearly still at hand because she was accused of attempting to stab one of those promoters in the courtroom. Bass seems to have given up his bullfighting career shortly thereafter. Occasionally, bloodless bullfights are still staged in the United States, but the 1904 World's Fair debacle shows that it's not really a preferred sport here. In St. Louis, we prefer baseball, and the bulls are reserved for barbecue. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.